First of all, it's great to see you all. It's good to be back here at the School of Theology again. Special word of thanks to Matt and to Bailey for putting together, I guess mostly Matt. Well, do you still work at the 11 office?
No.
Okay. Well, very special thanks to Matt, who was responsible for putting together the food for this afternoon, and I do think is Alyssa the one person with us?
I think so.
Yeah. Well, if you turn around,
okay.
Say hello.
Hi.
Hi, Alyssa.
Hi.
Good to almost see you again.
Oh, good to see you.
But before I do some introductions, let me just give a very brief context for wanting to offer this seminar. Why I think it would be something that I hope some of you would be interested in, and if not, that you would pass it on to some of your student colleagues here. I had an opportunity last summer.
If you would mute your microphone, that would be really helpful.
Can she hear us? All right.
She can.
Okay.
If she would mute her microphone, then we won't hear her tapping on the computer.
But I had the chance last summer, for 6 weeks, I received a fellowship to do research at the John Rylands Library, which is a place you will be hearing a little bit more about in Joseph's presentation. The John Rylands is one of the biggest repositories of Methodist material in the world, probably the biggest. And one of the groups that sponsored me is a Wesley Methodist Study Center at Nazarene Theological College in suburban Didsbury, just a little outside the city center. And it was an opportunity for me to get to know Joseph a bit. And we had a conversation last summer, and we thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to offer students here, as well as alums, an opportunity to travel, both to do the historical stuff, because as I think most of you know, I am a historical geek. And this is a particular part of the United Kingdom that is very rich in Methodist heritage, and there's a lot to see. But also another part of this seminar is an opportunity to look at sort of the intersection of history, tradition, with what's going on today. And in the context of being in the birthplace of the Wesleyan tradition, it's a good opportunity to really look at what a variety of different churches in those traditions are doing in terms of making sense of the changing context of the 21st century. And with that in mind, I'd like to warmly welcome our two guests. Dr. Joseph Wood is a lecturer at church history at Nazarene Theological College. One of the things that might disappoint you is, unfortunately, Joseph does not have a British accent, that you will discover very soon. But Joseph has had a long-time affiliation with NTC, and he is working with me on putting together this seminar. His spouse, the Reverend Cat Wood, is pastor of Ashton Church of the Nazarene, a congregation that you will be hearing a little bit about. And I'm very happy. They've come a long way to be here. They've already probably put visiting different schools in the northeastern United States. They probably put on about 1,000 miles on your odometer. And I know they're very tired, but I'm very pleased to welcome you to Boston University and the School of Theology, and we look forward to hearing more about this seminar and why it would be good for people here and others to come.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Chris. And for those watching, welcome to you. I hope you find this presentation helpful, and feel free to send any questions you have to Chris or myself. I'll give you the contact details later. For you in the room, I'd like to get to know your names and why you are here. So if we could go around, I know Chris, if we start here, just say your name and what program you're on, or if you're an alumni, what you're doing now.
Sure. My name's John Ashley, originally from Manchester,
Hey,
UK.
look at that.
Born in Ashton, actually, and I'm a Master Divinity student, second year here at BU.
My name's Brandon. I'm a fourth year MDiv MSW degree, and so I'll be graduating at the end of this year.
Okay.
And I'm just interested in learning more about this seminar.
My name is Matt Llewellyn-Otten. Third year MDiv, graduating this year. I'm here to create hospitality for everybody.
You've done well, thank you.
My name is Bailey Bronner. I'm a third year MDiv, and I'm interested in learning more about it.
My name is Susan Hassinger. I'm a retired United Methodist bishop. I'm here as bishop at Resi at the school in Luxford. And was invited by Chris to come and wanted to meet you and see what you're offering.
Introduce yourself.
My name's Kat. I'm here because I have a British accent, I think. I was brought along on the trip. I'm a pastor at a Nazarene church in Ashton, and I've been there for, it'll be 4 years in May that I've been there.
And could you introduce yourself online?
Me?
No, well, you can introduce
Oh,
yourself.
my God.
I was just looking at the camera.
Can I hear you? Alyssa?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
There you
I can
go.
only partly hear what you're saying. So, my name is Alyssa, and I'm a STH graduate. I serve 6 churches in Oregon, and yeah. Six.
Oh wow. It's just a few things on your plate, right?
And we have someone else as well.
Okay, and you?
Hi, I'm Alicia Wood, and I'm in Syracuse, New York, and I only have one church, so but I'm having a good time with that one church. And I'm interested in this because I'm a little bit of a John Wesley nerd, so I think it'll be fun.
There's a few of us around, that's okay. You're in good company.
Hi, Alicia.
Yeah.
Hi!
Now, I'm sorry for those online and for those watching later, you won't get to participate in this activity. But for those in the room, I have some goodies. So,
Tea and chocolate.
tea and chocolate. So, my apologies. You'll have to come on the trip to get your teas and chocolates. But anyway, take as much as you like. Actually,
And not just chocolate, but Cadbury chocolate.
Exactly. Which we don't like to say it, but Kraft own Cadbury now.
Oh.
It's not a good thing for the British chocolate company. What I have now is a short presentation where I'll be talking about NTC, a bit about Manchester, the city, a little bit about the ideas we have for this trip, and then I'll ask Kat to come and talk a little bit about Ashton, the church where she is, because that's one of the places that we'll be visiting when we come. And at the end, we'll have a few questions, if you have any, and then we'll hang about a little bit and have a chat. I don't know if you emailed this to them yet or not, but for those online, we will get you this PowerPoint emailed as soon as we can. And it's also being recorded for future use. You've met us, there we are, but you haven't met our little girls. So we've left these guys behind. So this is Evelyn, she's 5. This is Miriam, she's 2. And we thank Nana for bless Nana, because Granddad just left on a trip today, so she's got them for another 2 days by herself. But anyway, there they are, we missed them, there we all are. If you don't know where Manchester is, it's up in the northwest of England, and not too far from, let's see here, you've got Liverpool there, Chester down here. The college is just south of Manchester. I think it's just 5 miles in a village called Didsbury, just south of the city. Manchester is it was basically born out of the Industrial Revolution. It's been a city for a long time. It's actually a Roman city, to be honest. But it really boomed in the 19th century, going from a population of, I don't know, about 50,000 to about 250, 300, 400,000 in just a few years' time. in the mid-19th century because of industry. And one of the one of the primary industries in both Manchester and then over in Yorkshire and the Leeds area was textiles. And what they would do is they would get fabric, raw materials, cotton, actually from the United States primarily, shipped over to the British Isles, and then they would create yarn and fabric and things like that. Well, you'll see when you come to Manchester, you're going to walk past the statue of Abraham Lincoln. And the first time I saw that, I thought, what in the world is Abraham Lincoln doing in Manchester? Well, it's because they were receiving cotton from the South. And during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln corresponded with Manchester, business leaders and said, would you stop taking cotton from the South because you're funding the war? And the folks in Manchester sided with the Northern cause, abolition, and they actually stopped buying cotton from the South, and which actually helped defund, in some sense, the war, which ultimately helped end the war. And so they created a statue of Abraham Lincoln and a copy in bronze of the letter exchange between the two. It's actually in the middle of the city center. But it's a great little expression of what the city is all about. But with industry comes, big factories, big machines. Manchester is the birthplace of the computer, the birthplace of the Rolls-Royce engine. So it's known for industry. There was a shipping canal, which isn't used very much today, but it was in its heyday a very busy place because it connects all the way to Liverpool. So anything coming in from the Atlantic Ocean and the Irish Sea could make its way inland to Manchester. And then a network of canals that connects one side of the country to the other using a system of locks as well from Manchester to Leeds. Enabled the transportation of these raw materials over into the Leeds area also to produce cotton or to produce fabric and thread and things. But there also comes some issues with the Industrial Revolution, as you probably are aware, like child labor and urbanization, pollution. And so Manchester has a bit of a tainted past in that regard. This is just an image of children working in a factory, and there's often today comments about health and safety overload. You're not letting us do anything. You'll probably hear of that when you go there, but you can kind of see why. We don't want that to ever happen again, and its roots are in the 19th century, and expressions of that were in Manchester. Because the population boomed, you got to have places to live. So this is a typical, residencies just outside a factory where people would work. And houses like this still exist. Less pollution today, thank you very much. But these are terrace homes, people living on top of each other, sanitation not very good. But in the midst of all of that, the church responds, which is something that we'll be learning about both on this trip and a little bit later in the seminar as well. Manchester today looks a lot different. It's a very cosmopolitan area. Greater Manchester has about 2 million people, and it's very diverse. Lots of people from different countries. One of the things that I recognized when I first moved there is you go into the, to the grocery store, and you hear 3 or 4 different languages being spoken. It's just because it's a melting pot of lots of different people. One feature of Manchester, which you will see riding on the bus, is called the Curry Mile. So if you're into Asian food, if you're into Indian food, it's there. Anything you want, it's there. And it's literally a mile of curry restaurants in Manchester, and one of the major bus routes. This is the tallest building in Manchester. It houses a Hilton hotel, but also apartments, and you can see it for miles and miles and miles. You may have seen images like this last summer. We did have a terrorist attack in the Manchester arena, but the city really did come out in response in expression of love and of unity. This was the beginnings of what became a massive memorial in St. Anne's Square. The flowers and balloons and toys fills this huge square. It was beautiful to see that, as well as the vigil that took place from the town hall. And if you Google it, this is the place. It's a poem that was written by a local in response to the terrorist attack, which is fantastic, by a local artist. Now, in the middle of all of that is this. This is called St. Anne's Church. And it's St. Anne's Square is where you saw that image of people bringing you the flowers and things. But this right here is a glimpse of the church at the heart of the city. It is a Church of England. It's an established church. It's been there for many, many years. But on the wall is a little lead sign with one little line here. In 1738, John Wesley preached here. That's it. Right? Now, Wesley made lots of trips to Manchester. Methodism was very prominent in Manchester in the 18th century and beyond. But I highlight this one to show that in the heart of the city, Methodism made its presence known, beginning with Wesley preaching in 1738 and other times, but then continuing on. So this isn't necessarily him in front of St. Anne's Square, but you've seen the images. That's what it's like. And that's what I'm hoping that we can do in this trip, is to show you both the historical roots of Methodism at the heart of the city, but then also how that has translated throughout the 18th into the 19th, 20th, and now in the 21st century. Methodism still is at the heart of the city. It just might not look like that, okay? Let me tell you a little bit about the college. So this is where I spend a lot of my time. This is what we call the White House, because it has a mock Tudor front on it. Chris has some more images if he wants to see more. I've got a few on here. But it was a stately home a long time ago, which then was purchased by the college, and now the college owns about 3 or 4 acres of land, which is a lot of land for Manchester City Centre. It's actually one of the largest green spaces south of the city of private land. But that's where faculty offices, administrative offices are. This is one of our residences there, and then the main residence here, where you'll be staying, is called Hurlett Hall. It has 16 single rooms, and each room has its own bathroom. It's an interesting type of bathroom. I don't know how you describe this one. It's like a cubicle where you've got the shower, the toilet, and the sink all in one like molded piece of plastic. Don't know if you've ever seen that before or not. But it means that you got your own private bathroom, which is kind of nice, because when Kat lived there, it was a shared toilet, so you had to go down the corridor. We have self-catering, so we don't have a cafeteria or anything. We're a really small college. We've got about 300 students in total, and only about 25 or so live on campus. So you cook for yourself. What we're going to do on this trip is we'll provide some of your meals, but you'll probably be cooking for yourself. And that actually is a really good activity, because it brings you together as a community, cooking together, eating together. So I hope you find that as a very good expression of you're in this thing together kind of a thing. There's a back lawn. While you're there, we're hoping for good weather. And the back lawn's a great place to sit, to reflect, to study, to get a suntan, and to play football. Not American football. Our library, we're a theological college, so biblical studies, church history, practical social theology. We have about 35,000 volumes in our main library, which is actually a really good library. And then next door to that is what we call the Dean House. The Dean House was a private home that was then sold to the college, and it's been connected to the rest of our campus. And in the Dean House is what Chris mentions, the Manchester Wesley Research Center. Now, the Manchester Wesley Research Center has been around for about 11 years now, I think. And it is the physical location of a dream of Dr. McGonigal, who was principal of the college. And what he wanted to see was a place where people in the Wesleyan Methodist tradition can come and do research, with a particular emphasis on the holiness tradition side of Methodism. So that's what it began as. But since then, it's grown and developed. So you can see we have a number of volumes. We have all of these are PhD theses, both of our students and of some students from other institutions. We have some older books. We have some from the 18th century. We have some a bit older than that, housed in the library there. There's also a conservatory in the back, which has a really nice study space for our research students. What is that?
That's part of the liability of being in an old building.
Fair enough. Hey, my building's a lot older than yours. That's the Manchester Wesley Research Center. A colleague of mine, Jordan Hammond, he's the director of that, who Chris knows really well. And if you're ever interested in doing some deeper research on Wesley Methodism and the traditions that come out of that, we're a great place to do that, both just as a visitor or as a scholar, or if you're looking for a PhD and you didn't come here, you can come to us. All of our courses, from undergraduate all the way up to PhD, are validated by University of Manchester. So if you study with us, you get your degree from Manchester. A couple of images of the Deansgate Library, which Chris mentioned earlier. This is the outside. This was a private library, believe it or not, which was. It's killing me.
You're doing great.
Yeah. Well, I do have a 2-year-old. I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
So I know how to overlook things. It was a private library, which was actually created by John Marlin's wife, and her idea was that people in an urban environment needed to be educated, and so she raised a lot of money and created a library, which is now houses the Methodist Archives, which is the largest collection of Methodist materials in the world. And by that we mean, you can go to your library downstairs, you can get the works of John Wesley, the Bicentennial Edition, you can read his letters, or you can go here and you can read the handwritten letters with the marginal words, which say things that the publishers didn't want to produce, right? Lots of fascinating things in those works. Chris can tell you more about that.
Part of the trip is we'll have an opportunity to actually look at several examples from the Wesley Archives. So you'll probably get to see copies of Wesley's journals, different original editions of Charles Wesley hymns. It really is an amazing collection, but you'll definitely get to spend a bit of time in there.
Yeah. It is also it's a public museum as well, which is free. And one of the things that they are known for is one of the oldest fragments of the Gospel of John is on display. It's from the year 126. One of the oldest, pieces of the Bible that we actually have, which a lot of people go and see. Chris mentioned some copies of things. This from Charlestown is one of 2 in existence of the first hymn book published in North America. And it was written by John and Charles Wesley. So one of those copies is there. I don't know if the other one is here or if it's in Library of Congress or if it's in Drew, but the other copy is in this country, and then Manchester has the other one. But there's loads of things. I took a class there last January, and Gareth Lloyd, the librarian, he brought out 10 or 12 items from the library and let our students just have a go. I was surprised that he even did, not white gloves or anything. But anyway, it was really fascinating that they could see these things. I call it living history. It brings stuff to life. Back in St. Anne's Square. So on that same day, when we went to the library, what we'll probably do is we'll walk just up the road back to St. Anne's, where John Wesley preached. And inside St. Anne's, there you go. Again, church in the heart of the city. What I did was I did a short lecture on John Wesley's preaching, and then I preached one of his sermons from the pulpit. They didn't know I was going to do that, but I just did it. And the funny thing was when random people walked to church buildings, they didn't know what was going on because I'm preaching an 18th century sermon. But we'll go and we'll visit that as well because he preached there a number of times. A couple more slides about Manchester. This is the Manchester Art Gallery, which again is a free art gallery that anyone can go to. And one of the things that they have are a collection of William Holman Hunt's paintings. If you've never heard about him, Google him. Look at some of those images. They're really fascinating. You might recognize the Jesus I stand at the door and knock. He's got a little lantern here. That's a William Holman Hunt painting as well. But anyway, a few of his works are in the Manchester Library and Manchester Art Gallery. One of the ones that impresses me the most is it's called like the Chariot Race or something, and it's like a 30-foot by 20-foot. This thing is huge, it's the biggest painting I've ever seen. And when you're standing there, you really feel like these horses are gonna come and charge you. But again, it's all free. Lots of things to do. That's a little bit about NTC. That's a little bit about Manchester, the city. And I'll ask Kat to come up and tell you a little bit about church life in Manchester. And she's going to talk to you about our church, Ashton.
This is the Ashton Church in Nazarene. We're to the east of Manchester. So NTC, they're to the south. That's the rich, nice part. And the Ashton Church is in the east part. And geography can actually tell you quite a bit about the place. And so Ashton, it's a poor part. It's not a desirable place to be. When you go to the east of the city, that wasn't a desirable place to live because of the way the wind blows and so all the pollution and the smells of this city. We're talking about people living on top of each other. You know, they don't have kind of sanitation like we do now. And so actually to live to the east of the city, that was just a bad place to be because you would get the smell, you would get the pollution, you would get the smog, kind of all the bad things. And Ashton is still one of the poorest. I'm pretty sure it's in there's definitely parts of Ashton are in the bottom 10% of like what we call the poverty index. So it's basically the poorest 10% of the UK. And so I first came to Ashton as an associate pastor in May 2014, and in January last year I became co-pastor with a guy called Carl McCann. So if you guys are coming on the trip, you'll get to meet him. And he was actually kind of born, grew up in Ashton, and has been the pastor there for about 11 years now. And we work together. And so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our church and what we do. Now, our church is probably one of the bigger churches in the area in Ashton, and we, you know, if everybody was to come on one Sunday, we might have about 100, 110 people, but we regularly get about 80 people come into our church, and we're a very busy church, I guess, for kind of a church of that size. So we have 2 worship services on a Sunday. We have 8 house groups that have been built up. So when Carl first started, there was 1, and that's been built up to 8 kind of house groups that all meet midweek. And that really is the heart of our church, and pastoral care of our church, really. You know, 2 pastors kind of caring for 80 people actually is just impossible, really. And so these house groups are really important. That's where people do their discipleship in depth. And where they kind of have prayer support and just like a little community. We have children's work, which is really well known in the community. So, you know, we have like a children's parent and toddler club that meets on a Friday morning. We have a kids club that meets on a Friday evening. And we have a youth club as well. And again, the work that we do with young people is just known in the community. And it fluctuates. Our children's work is actually really steady. The youth work does kind of fluctuate. But we did receive some money from the local government council, is what we call them. And so we were able to make some renovations to our building. And so actually now it's like a church that meets in a youth centre. We have like a traversing wall on one side, you know, ripped out the floor and did that stuff, have like a pretty good mezzanine floor just to make it really youth friendly. And we're known well in the community for what we do. One of the main things we're known for though actually is our work with homeless people and with people who have alcohol addiction or substance abuse addictions. And so again, about 11 years ago, so we would do a meal on a Sunday once a month where the homeless and the addicts of the local area would come, and quickly the church kind of became aware that actually this wasn't enough. This was going to be more than just food. And so one of the guys at our church took a year-long career break from what he did, and set up a charity, what we call New Hope. And so we have a charity that runs 2 days a week, and so it teaches life skills, we teach literacy and numeracy, we try and help people get into jobs, jobs, we try and help people kind of beat their addictions. Some of them come to faith, some of them participate in kind of the more traditional church kind of life that we have, and some of them don't. We have gone into social housing, so we developed and we changed. There's a 2-bed flat that's a part of our property, and we changed another part of our building into like a bed sit, and so we've housed refugees in there, and we try and get people who come through New Hope who can be housed in there so they're not living on the streets. And we really work with them to help kind of rehabilitate them. But a big part of what that does actually, just a massive thing, is just social skills. You know, these people, some of them who have been addicts for kind of 30, 40 years, they only know a certain way of life, and they only have a certain view of the world and of people and of authorities and agencies and even of the church. Some of them very negative, some of them very positive, and so it's just working with them and trying to help them just have a better quality of life. We, until recently, so it stopped in January just to some changes that were brought in kind of from their side, but we worked with a charity called Boaz as well. And so we did a night shelter every Sunday evening for asylum seekers and refugees, so those who have been denied asylum. So, you know, if you know how the system works, you come into a country, you apply for asylum. If you're accepted, then you get access to funding, you get access to housing, you know, and all that kind of stuff. If you're denied, though, actually, you're just kind of in limbo. You can appeal it, and so this charity called Boaz work with them in that. But our role was to provide somewhere for them to be able to stay. It was warm, and we provide them with meals. And so ours was, they have a network of churches. Ours was on a Sunday night, but they have different church provides this kind of shelter and accommodation a different night of the week. And so we did that. But I mean, the kind of town of Ashton itself, it has a really low rate of education, like among kind of young people. Not many people go on to kind of further education. Alcoholism and substance misuse is huge. Teenage pregnancy is massive. And then as a kind of, so it's Greater Manchester, we're about 7 miles from the city centre. And so we kind of have the ripple effect of all of those things that you would find in a city centre. But I mean, one thing, particularly with the Church of the Nazarene, with the Wesleyan and kind of holiness roots, actually, is that a lot of our churches are found in these urban areas, because that's where the need is, and that's what the call is, you know. And actually, as a holiness church, that's what we believe and kind of hold to. And so that's a little bit about Ashton and what we do. We do the kind of normal church stuff too. You know, we preach, we teach, we worship together. We try and figure out what it is like to be a community of faith and living that out. And we actually have a lot of. Joseph did an article actually for a Christian magazine in the UK, and actually it's about the fact that actually what we have now is we have people who don't know the Bible at all. So like when I was growing up, and my mum is a pastor as well in the Church of the Nazarene, and so you would have people who were kind of de-churched, if you like. So they might have grown up in the church or gone to church as a child, but then they just kind of drift away. They don't see the importance of it. They don't really have the time to think about kind of faith and just want to kind of live their life. And now actually we have people who have no connection of the church, or the only view or knowledge of church for them is what they see in TV, what they see in movies, you know, this kind of very dated, I don't know what it's like here, but in the UK, you know, it's often, you know, the vicar that is doing something naughty that they shouldn't be in the TV series or sitcoms or soaps and stuff like that. And so this really is their only kind of understanding of it, and so it's working with that. It's being able to tell them, you know, the stories of the Bible for the first time in ways that are relevant to them and accessible to them, and in ways that really get but actually to see that as a positive thing. So we see that as a very positive thing. It's a way to be able to teach them who Jesus is without all the baggage actually that sometimes comes with churches and traditions, and so that's what we're finding at the
Thinking,
moment.
thinking of, actually, this is, I think, a really good portrayal of ministry in urban England. Have you two seen the show Rev?
Yeah,
Love it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Has anybody seen that show?
Yeah.
You
It's very
can,
fun.
you can get it on, it's on Hulu, yeah. Yeah, it's really worth watching.
So he's an Anglican vicar in London, but it's
Urban
a
church.
similar thing, like in a more urban area, and yeah, I mean it is very funny. You should watch it. You might find it encouraging and also affirming. You know, like I've been there and I know what he's talking about, and so it's good. One of the other things that we did, again, this stopped just because of we didn't have the people really to work with it anymore. So this bottom right, we have a coffee lounge. It's called Fresh Ground Ashton. It's just open 2 days of the week, but it was open on Saturday as well. And one of our young people, he was 15 at the time, maybe 16, and he's since gone on to study in Scotland. But basically started up like a social enterprise, using that space and using the coffee. And one of the banks was doing this. Like a grant thing, you know, you can apply with your ideas, and they picked a few, and so he actually got an investment of about £30,000. And what they did was they started up this youth cafe where young people would come and they would work in the cafe, but instead of getting like paid, they would earn credits, and those credits could be traded then for like educational things, or so they could use it to go towards you know, like the youth camp that the church do or whatever, or they could use it to do music lessons, or, you know, if they wanted to learn karate, like whatever it was that they wanted to do, they could come and they could get the work experience, which would really kind of help them. It was also a way for us to just minister, you know, to young people, but actually that they would get really practical help, work experience, and just a really positive kind of environment for them to be in. It was all about, you know, what they put in, they got out. So whatever the profits were, that kind of determines how much the credits were worth. Stuff like this. But so just some really cool stuff actually that the church does, and the way that they engage with the community. Because in this kind of environment, it really is about thinking of how to do church in a way that is culturally relevant to your specific, you know, community. Because even within the UK, like the areas are so diverse. And one thing that you'll notice if you come and if you travel around a little bit is even just the accents around England and how close they are and things like that. But culture just changes really in quite a short geographical distance. So being in touch with your community and what it's like is really important.
So again, that's just one example of church doing lots of creative different things to engage with our community. And this is the primary thing that we want people who come on a trip like this to see, that just like Wesley did in the 18th century, creating some kind of an adaptable or an adaptive mechanism by which we can introduce people to the faith and then disciple them once they become Christians, which can work in any type of environment. You see the remnants of that still vibrant in the UK. Another thing that we'll probably do is engage with our Manchester Centre for the Study of Christianity and Islam. That's what those letters mean, which is also based at NTC. And what this charity started as, or a Centre for the Study, started a few years ago, was a way of trying to get dialogue going between Christians and Muslims in Manchester. And it's run by a Church of England vicar and an ordained Nazarene minister in partnership with local mosques, which I think you got a picture or two in there, and imams, and some really good creative dialogue has been taking place between the two. And it was integral last summer when we had the bombing. And of course, I don't know if you knew this, but the chap who did it was from the mosque that you visited. Yeah. And so immediately there's questions, being raised. What's being taught in the mosque? What did this guy regularly attend? What was he learning from there? Is it radical? Blah, 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 blah. And so a place like this facilitated conversation between Christians and Muslims, and was able to hopefully tone down what could have been really harsh rhetoric. But as you've seen, it was a beautiful expression of unity in Manchester, which is really good. And that's part of your experience there, hopefully. And of course, we're not too far from the place that most everybody wants to see when they come to the UK, London. We're only a 2-hour train ride. down. I mean, we prefer the north, to be honest, but maybe you do too.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you come, it's your once-in-a-lifetime trip. Go and see London. Loads of things to see, loads of things to do, lots of free stuff to do. But there's also another church that we might visit that is doing some new and creative things as well, from a Methodist Wesleyan tradition, another church in the Nazarene actually, just here in Clapham, which is not too far. So the things that you are thinking about are in that area in Westminster. So not too far from that. Fresh Ground Church in the Nazarene, which is was an old, 100-year-old, small conservative evangelical, just to use the American language, church, which was on the brink of closing, and then the denomination decided to go in and say this is in the heart of a community called Clapham, who could really do with an expression of faith in a new way, and so they invested and created this. So this is now the Fresh Ground Church in the Nazarene, and it is a coffee shop here in the front, and then a big hall in the back, and then it's got lots of spaces that can be rented out for community projects. And then also you see the little corridor there on the right goes up to a flat at the top, so it has a house as a part of the space as well. I'll give you a couple of other images. So this is looking from the coffee shop into the main hall, which you can see about 120 or so comfortably in there. We won't watch the video. There is a video that I can send you a link to. But just to say that, again, where we're living in a poor part of town, this is a very rich part of town. And so in order to engage with that community, the church had to invest a lot of money because coffee culture in London is of a certain standard. And if you weren't to that standard, then no one would reach your doorstep. And so it was a risk. Still kind of is a risk because this is brand new. It's only been going for about a year and a half. But again, another way of engaging with the community in London, in a very different part of the country. A couple of other things that we might visit. Chester. This is not too far from Manchester. It's about an hour's drive, a little bit less. It's an ancient Roman city which has been around for about 2,000 years. But of course it didn't look like that 2,000 years ago. There's a shopping district there, beautiful big cathedral there as well. But there's also a Roman wall that goes around the city, so you can see the roots and walk in the footsteps of Jesus. No, not quite. But about that old anyway, which is still around the city. And then of course, if you want to see a castle, this is a great example in Conway, which again is on the North Wales coast. I think Chris was able to visit that as well. So while you're there, we're going to be learning history, we're going to be learning about Methodist roots, we're going to be seeing contemporary expressions of that, but also we'll have some fun as well, which might include these things. So that's all I've got. Thank you for paying attention and for listening. I don't know if you want to have some discussion now.
Let me just add a couple of points, and then I want to open it up for some questions that you might have for Joseph or for me. I will send, I've got a list of all of you who are here. I'll make sure that I'll send you a tentative itinerary for the trip. Now, some of this and probably a good chunk of it might change in terms of the dates, but it will give you a good idea of the kind of churches that we're going to be visiting. One of the connections that I've made, one of Joseph's faculty colleagues at MTC, her husband is a district minister in the Methodist Church of Great Britain, so that would be the equivalent in UMC lingo of a district superintendent. And he's put me in touch with several churches that I think we're definitely going to be planning on visiting. I also have to say, one of the things that I love about MTC, and we won't probably experience this every day, but it's definitely a must, is that every day around 10:40 they have a coffee time. So the campus stops and everybody kind of gathers for a cup of coffee. So it's a wonderful opportunity to meet different people, both students at the theological college, staff, as well as faculty. The final thing that Didsbury is just it's a lovely it's a suburb, but it feels like a village. Yeah. You got a sense of that from the college, but it's a very easy walk into town where you have pubs, you have restaurants, you have places to shop. So, and they're churches that you, just from the standpoint of walking on the high street, you can get a sense of what some of the churches are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really, it's a beautiful spot, but also it's a great jumping off point, I think, for the kind of exploration we're going to be doing.
Of course. And like I said, I've just given you a couple of examples. There are many other examples of church doing church in different ways. One of the reasons we wanted to do a trip like this is to at least give some of you an idea that the church isn't dead in Britain, as many people might like to, generalize. If you did see, like the big established churches, some Methodist churches, churches of England, if you go to Wales, the Welsh chapels, many of them are closed, many of them are furniture shops or they're apartments or something like that. And so if that's your understanding of what church is, then you would think the church might be dead in many places. However, it's very much alive. You just have to look for it a bit deeper. And so one of the impetus for this is thinking about church in post-Christendom. So in a place where the church doesn't have the same platform that it used to, where most people who grow up now don't go to Sunday school as children, who have no framework for their understanding of the Bible. One of the ladies who started coming to our house group who became a Christian has never read the Bible in her life or heard the stories. And we read Revelation the other day, the good bits, not the bad bits.
Start.
Yeah. Well, it was a risk to go there, but what we wanted to do is we did like a 7-week course of an overview of the Bible. And when we get to Revelation, we read from Revelation 21, which talks about wiping every tear from your eye. There'll be no more pain or sorrow or anything like that. And as I'm reading this, tears are streaming down her face, and I'm thinking, you're actually hearing this for the very first time. You've never heard this passage before in your life. And knowing what's going on in her life right now, to hear that is exactly what she needed to hear. And so she's found a home in the church. I mean, it's a mess. It's not easy, and we're actually happy to be away for a few days, to be honest. Kat can attest to this one. She's had a difficult few days. But it's those moments like that we really emphasize and gravitate to, hold on to see that God really is working in people's lives. So, it would be amazing if a group of you guys could come over and experience something, because who knows what it's going to be like. And maybe you see glimpses of this already in this country. And again, we're shaped by what we see on the news and what our friends say and stuff. But you're real folks in ministry, and you know what it's like. And it could be that something here sparks your interest in doing something different. It might give you an inspiration to do something new, or it might give you a glimpse of the future. Who knows what it's going to be like in this country in 20, 30 years. But if there's any questions at this point.
Well, Joseph, I have one, which I think maybe is on the minds of some of the people here. Could you maybe say just a little bit about cost?
Yeah. We haven't come up with a figure yet because we need to know how many people are coming. But we're thinking that it'll be in the range of 1,500, 2,000, something like that. That would
pounds or dollars?
Dollars. That would be, like actual cost. The reason I say we can't give you, a final figure is we don't know how many people. So if we're going places that you need admission tickets to, or if we're traveling or whatnot, that might increase the cost. But we want it to be small, to be honest, like 15 people at the most, because part of that's practical. We can hire a minibus, which is a lot cheaper than a big, huge bus if we need to go somewhere. But it also gives you a sense of, I don't know, there's an intimacy with a small group. This is why the class meetings were 11 people in Wesley's Methodist in the 18th century. You can know each other, and you can work together, and you can learn together and grow together over the course of a couple of weeks. So we're wanting to keep costs down, to be honest, because we want it to be accessible to most of you. You'd be happy to know that at the moment airline flights are pretty cheap. We found some good deals. me and my wife actually flew over here for 350 pounds to return through Iceland Air. So mention that one, Iceland Air, if you want to go to the UK. So at the moment, airline costs are pretty low. You'll be staying on campus. We might do one overnight trip while we're there. But of course, we'll let you know the details of that. But just have like a $2,000 figure in your head. I mean, you'll want to have spending money. You'll want to buy stuff for friends for yourself.
And part of too what Joseph is indicating is that some of the cost too is going to depend on how extravagant that you want to spend in terms of you can eat very cheaply and inexpensively, even just around the Didsbury area, places that we might go, or you can be very frugal. I mean, there's definitely a leeway, but the actual accommodations, Joseph, only are running what, approximately 25 pounds.
Oh, like per night?
Per night, yeah.
Yeah, it's 25 pounds. I have to double check, but it's
Yeah.
not more than 25.
The figure that you just said, does that include, is that inclusive of flights or exclusive of flights?
That would be inclusive.
Okay.
Yeah. We're trying to keep this cost down as low as possible. Inclusive of flights, inclusive of accommodation. We're going to provide 2 meals a day, breakfast and lunch. It won't be extravagant, but I mean, breakfast in Britain is a piece of toast, to be honest.
Beans is a breakfast.
Beans on toast. Yes, I'm not there yet. But no, but then the evenings will be up to you. So as a group, you can go out for a meal together, or you can go out individually, or you can go to the grocery store. That's part of the experience.
Yeah.
Buy the raw ingredients and make your own food.
And it's like
on
any
campus.
city. Manchester has, what we call the Northern Quarter, which is like the kind of hipster, expensive, lots of different experiences. Depends on how kind of foodie you are. You can find those places in the city, and actually even in Didsbury and West Didsbury too. Or there's cheaper alternatives that's still good. So kind of like what Chris said, it can be as expensive or as cheap as you like it to be in that sense.
And if there's any kind of, if we went to a place where there was a mission, so if we went to Conway Castle as a group, that would be a part of your cost as well. But most of what we'll be doing is just going and visiting people that we know, churches, a bit of teaching time at the college itself. We do plan on taking a trip down to London so we can check out fresh ground, but then we might do an optional extra night. So last time I did this with the group, we took the train down and we had what we call an open return ticket, which means you can come back on any train that's not the busy time within a month. We don't recommend you stay there for a month. But what we did was, we're going back now. If you want to stay an extra night, that's up to you. You figure that out and then go back the next day. So a couple of days of free time.
John, you don't have to answer this. How many of you have been to the UK? Have traveled? So I think most people find it, coming from the States, I think it's very easy to get from point A to point B.
It is. And there's different options.
There are a lot of different options, yeah.
As well. One key thing is buying things in advance. So if we were to take a trip down to London, we would want to buy those tickets on your behalf far in advance because they're much cheaper. We've gotten return tickets to London for £30 before, which is hardly anything, but you have to book those like 12 weeks in advance.
It can be as much as 180.
Yeah.
If
you buy it on the day.
So.
But yeah, it'll be fantastic. And then I think, if anyone wanted to do this for credit, I think that's going to be an option. As
Absolutely.
Well. Yeah. Which, value for money, there you go.
Yeah.
Which again, Chris can tell you more about what might be on the syllabus. But for everyone, we'll still have some teaching time where we're going to try and trace this tradition from its roots in the 18th century all the way through. And it won't just be Chris or me. I'm going to get some of our colleagues to help teach as well, bringing on their own expertise. For example, colleague Louise, she's working on her PhD in it's like a geography of people with an emphasis on architecture and how architecture reflects the geography of people. In other words, where people are, your buildings can communicate that. And so she's doing a case study on a monastery in the city, just down the road from where she lives in Manchester, called Gortman Monastery. She's doing a PhD on that as a way of investigating that community and the people around it, which is pretty fascinating. Anyway, what she'll do for us is talk about Manchester industrialization and architecture. That'll be a part of that. And of course, at each place that we visit, like Kat's giving you a glimpse of today, we'll have pastors who are in the trenches, so to speak, to tell you about their experience. And yeah, that's about it. Any other questions?
I have a question. This may show a little bit of my ignorance of the Methodist Church too, but will there be connections with the Methodist Church as well?
Yeah,
British Methodist
that's what
Church?
Chris mentioned.
Yeah.
So one of my colleagues is called Julie. She's an ordained Methodist minister. She teaches practical theology for us, and her husband is a district superintendent. And so he and his connections are a part of our tentative itinerary as well. Interesting stuff happening in British Methodism right now, with the Church of England as well. If you've done any study on Wesley, you know there was tensions there the whole time in the relationship between Methodism and Church of England, which ultimately became you're not related anymore. But now they're trying to bridge that gap again, and they're thinking about since 2003, there's something called the Anglican Methodist Covenant, which is an agreement between the two to work towards joining back together. And so just, 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Church of England Synod met, and they passed a resolution to move forward with this. The issues on the Methodist side of things in Britain, where we don't want to join because you didn't allow women in all levels of authority in the Church of England. But that one is now not an issue because Church of England now allow women to become bishops. So that's not an issue. But the other issue was you need to validate that all of the ordinations since 1784, when Wesley did the naughty thing of ordaining somebody, that they've been valid, because there's a group in the Church of England who don't see Methodist ordination as a valid ordination, which means you're denying the ordination of 200 and something years of ministry. And so they're working towards that. And on the Church of England side, they must have bishops. In British Methodism, they don't have bishops. I know we do here in United Methodism, but in British Methodism, they don't have bishops. They have an annual, they have a president of conference, which changes every year, and they have superintendents as well.
There's a lot of similarity. In a lot of ways, British Methodism has hung on to a lot of the traditional Wesleyan language, particularly in terms of circuits. There's a vocabulary, there's a feel. There are similarities. There's a kind of a fraternal recognition of each church's orders, and you probably participated when you were on the active in the Council of Bishops, Susan, of some of that connection. And both churches will send delegates. They'll be represented at each other's conferences. So there's a lot of similarity, but also I think one of the things about this trip too will bring out some of the unique challenges. And I think the fascinating ramification of what this relationship with the Anglican Communion might look like.
One thing I would say though is that it also depends on who you talk to in the Methodist Church in Britain, what the church is like. So you might get a different flavor from Julie and her husband than you would from another one of our friends called Sarah. So Sarah is a lay pastor, and they really do use and squeeze as much as they can out of lay ministry in the UK, because they don't have as much money to pay for pastors, for presbyters. So you might have a presbyter overseeing 4 or 5 churches, like our friends online. But the real work, in the lay pastor's opinion, is being done by the lay pastor. So that's another challenge they have. I don't know if you have that here, you know, Methodism as much.
It's going that way.
Is it going that way?
Local cast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is because mainly, you know, congregation is declining, so you don't have as much income, so you don't have as much money to pay, so you need volunteers. Yeah, it might be a bit further along in the UK than it is here. But again, so one angle of the Anglican Methodist covenant is a beautiful sign of unity of the church joining back together. Another angle on the Anglican Methodist covenant is we're dying, you're dying, let's join together. I mean, just tell them like it is. Depends on who you talk to. There's about 2 million like active Church of England members, and there's about 250,000 active Methodists in Britain members.
And how many Nazarene?
Very small. We might have 3,000 well, we might have about 2,500 in England and Wales, and then if you include, that's what we call British Isles South, and then British Isles North, which is Scotland, Northern Ireland, we have another 3,000 or so, so about 5,000 in the islands itself. And we've always been a small church. But again, it's one of the reasons I think we've been able to, you know, continue on is the communities in which we're a part of. They really need us, and the churches see that as a valid part of the kingdom, you know, big K. That if we're not here, who's here ministering to these folks? Any other questions? I don't know what time you need to be finished. It is just after 1.
We do have a few more minutes, but I know folks have other places to go, and here's your chance to ask both Kat and Joseph any questions. One of the things, and Matt, do you have a sign-up sheet?
I do, yeah. I have everybody's name on here.
Excellent, excellent. And what I'll do is, and I'll even get this out to you all tomorrow. I'll just make sure that you get a copy of kind of a tentative draft. A little bit more information, again, that's, you know, you probably have seen in different announcements that have gone up, but particularly for students, there is a March 15th deadline for application. So I'll send out the reminder on that, and also again when your deposit would be. For Alicia and Alyssa, I hope you guys are still with us, but I'll make sure that you get some of that information as well. And the process of applying is a little bit different for alums who are going. So I'll make sure you're clear on that. But the most important thing is if you have any questions at all, whether it's about registration or if you're taking it for credit, what would that entail? Just direct those towards me. Very good.
Thank you all so much.
Joseph,
Thank you.
thank you so much. And one of the things too that I hope you will do is if you're considering going or if you want to go but can't, I do hope you will share the information on this experience with any of your colleagues here that you think might be interested. So
And take them a cup of tea and a chocolate. That might help. That might help sweeten the deal, so to speak.
Well, one of the things I said to Joseph and Kat is that first time I went to England was 1996, and the coffee has really come a long way. I mean, it's
You could say we have a coffee culture now.
definitely.
Both in the the Starbucks type world, but also the independent cafe world as well. Plenty of good coffee. And speaking of that, we actually have another friend who's in Scotland who just bought a roaster and is starting a roasting business. And they're going to be a supplier for another ministry, which is a coffee shop ministry in Paisley, Scotland, just outside of Glasgow. So again, entrepreneurial ideas can be kingdom building as well, if you're into that kind of thing. I don't think that could get busy, but I'll drink their coffee. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Appreciate it. Cheers.